You wake to the sound of water lapping gently against wood, the faint scent of reeds and mud drifting on the morning air. For a moment, you might imagine yourself on a peaceful river journey, the kind that poets write about, drifting lazily beneath the sun. But then the pain returns, sharp, insistent, impossible to ignore. Your wrists and ankles are raw from the ropes that bind them, your skin sticky with sweat and something far more foul. You try to move, but the effort only tightens the bonds, sending fresh waves of agony through your limbs. The world narrows to the confines of your prison. Two hollowed-out logs, one beneath you, one above, your body sandwiched between them, exposed to the sky and the swarming insects that already sense your helplessness. This is not a journey. It is a sentence. And the river is not your escape, but your executioner. Scaphism. The word itself is unfamiliar to most, a relic of a time and place that feels impossibly distant. Yet for those who know, it conjures images so grotesque, so inhuman, that even the most hardened historians flinch at the details. It is a punishment designed not merely to kill, but to annihilate the very concept of mercy. To turn the act of dying into a spectacle of suffering, a warning to all who might dare defy the will of kings. But how did such a punishment come to exist? Who were the people who devised it? And what does it reveal about the world that birthed it? To understand Scaphism, we must journey back to the heart of the ancient Persian Empire, a civilization renowned for its grandeur, its wealth, and its contradictions. The same empire that built the magnificent city of Persepolis, that fostered art and philosophy, that ruled over millions with a complex system of laws and administration. This empire also harbored a darkness at its core, a willingness to inflict suffering on a scale that defies comprehension. Imagine, for a moment, the world of ancient Persia. The year is 401 BCE. The empire stretches from the Indus Valley in the east to the shores of the Mediterranean in the west, a patchwork of peoples and cultures held together by the iron will of the great king. In the royal court, intrigue and betrayal are as common as the changing of the seasons. Power is both absolute and precarious, and the price of disloyalty is steep. It is in this world that Scaphism emerges not as a common punishment, but as a tool reserved for the most egregious of crimes. Treason, regicide, offenses that threaten the very foundation of the state. The historian Plutarch, writing centuries later, would describe Scaphism in terms that still chill the blood. The condemned is stripped naked and placed between two boats, or sometimes two hollowed-out logs, with only the head, hands, and feet protruding. The executioners force-feed the victim a mixture of milk and honey, both to sustain life and to induce violent diarrhea. More milk and honey are smeared over the exposed flesh, attracting swarms of insects. The boats are then set adrift on a stagnant pond or marsh, where the sun beats down and the air is thick with the hum of flies. What follows is a slow-motion descent into hell. The victim, unable to move, is tormented by thirst, hunger, and the relentless assault of insects. The milk and honey, both inside and out, become a breeding ground for maggots and vermin. The body swells with infection, the skin breaks open, and the mind, trapped in a cage of agony, begins to unravel. Death comes not in hours, but in days, sometimes as many as 17, according to the most lurid accounts. It is a death by 1,000 bites, a dissolution of the self that is as much psychological as it is physical. But why? Why invent a punishment so elaborate, so cruel, so calculated to inspire terror? The answer lies in the logic of power. In a world where the authority of the king is both sacred and absolute, any challenge must be met with a response that is equally absolute. Scaphism is not just a method of execution. It is a message, a performance, a ritual of dominance. It says to all who witness it, this is what awaits those who betray the throne. Your suffering will be total, your death will be slow, and your memory will be a warning to others. Yet even as we recoil from the horror of Scaphism, we must ask ourselves, what does it mean that such a punishment was possible? What does it reveal about the human capacity for cruelty, for inventiveness in the service of pain? The Persians were not unique in their brutality. Every civilization, from the Romans to the Chinese to the medieval Europeans, has devised its own methods of torture and execution. But Scaphism stands apart for its sheer theatricality, its insistence on making the process of dying into a public spectacle that as you lie trapped between the boats, the sun climbing higher in the sky, you become both victim and symbol. Your suffering is not your own. It belongs to the state, to the king, to the audience that watches and learns. In this way, Scaphism is not just a punishment, but a form of communication, a language written in blood and pain. But the story of Scaphism is more than just a catalogue of horrors. It is also a window into the anxieties and obsessions of an ancient world, a world where the boundaries between justice and vengeance, between order and chaos, were always perilously thin. To truly understand Scaphism, we must look beyond the boats and the insects, beyond the suffering of the individual, and ask, what kind of society needs such a punishment? What fears and insecurities does it reveal? And what, if anything, can it teach us about our own world, our own capacity for cruelty and compassion? The story of Scaphism is inseparable from the story of Persia itself, a land of contradictions, where splendor and savagery coexisted in uneasy balance. The Persian Empire, at its height, was a marvel of organization and ambition. Its roads stretched for thousands of miles. Its cities glittered with gold and lapis lazuli, and its kings claimed descent from the gods. Yet beneath the surface, the machinery of power was oiled with fear. The king's word was law, and the price of disobedience was often paid in blood. To understand why Scaphism emerged, we must first understand the anxieties that haunted the Persian elite. The empire was vast, but it was also fragile. Its borders were constantly threatened by enemies, Greeks to the west, nomads to the north, rebellious satraps within. The king's authority depended on the loyalty of his subjects, and that loyalty could never be taken for granted. In such a world, the spectacle of punishment became a tool of governance, a way to remind everyone of the consequences of betrayal. But Scaphism was not just about deterrence. It was also about humiliation. In Persian culture, as in many ancient societies, honor was everything. To die quickly in battle was glorious. To die slowly, helpless, and exposed was the ultimate disgrace. Scaphism stripped the condemned of all dignity, reducing them to an object of pity and revulsion. The body, once a vessel of pride, became a site of decay, a warning to all who might contemplate treason. The most famous victim of Scaphism was a soldier named Mithridates, whose story is preserved in the writings of Plutarch. According to the account, Mithridates was accused of killing Cyrus the Younger, a prince who had rebelled against his brother. King Artaxerxes II, the king, eager to make an example, ordered Mithridates to be executed by Scaphism. For 17 days, the unfortunate man lingered between life and death, his body consumed from within and without. His suffering became a legend, a tale whispered in the shadows of the court. But how much of this story is true? Ancient historians were not above embellishment, and the details of Scaphism are so lurid, so theatrical, that some scholars have questioned whether it was ever actually practiced. Perhaps it was a myth, a story invented to terrify would-be traitors. Or perhaps it was real but rare, a punishment reserved for the most notorious offenders, a kind of state-sponsored nightmare. Regardless of its historical accuracy, the legend of Scaphism has endured. It has become a symbol of the extremes to which human beings will go in the name of justice, or vengeance, or simple fear. It is a reminder that the line between civilization and barbarism is thinner than we like to believe. As we contemplate the horror of Scaphism, it is tempting to distance ourselves from the people who devised it. We tell ourselves that we are different, that our own societies are more humane, more enlightened. But history has a way of undermining such certainties. The methods may change, the justifications may evolve, but the impulse to punish, to make an example, to use suffering as a tool of control, these are constants of the human condition. Consider, for a moment, the spectacle of punishment in our own time. The public execution may be a thing of the past in many countries, but the desire to witness the suffering of others has not disappeared. It has simply migrated to new arenas: the courtroom, the prison, the media. We watch as lives are destroyed, reputations ruined, bodies broken, not with boats and honey, but with words, with laws, with the slow grind of bureaucracy. The tools are different, but the logic is the same. This is not to say that all punishment is unjust, or that all societies are equally cruel. But it is to recognize that the urge to inflict pain, to make suffering visible, is deeply rooted in our collective psyche. Scaphism, in all its horror, is a mirror held up to the darkest corners of the human soul. Yet even in the midst of suffering, there is resistance. The condemned, stripped of everything, may still find ways to assert their humanity. In the stories that survive, we catch glimpses of defiance. A final curse hurled at the king, a refusal to beg for mercy, a look of contempt that outlives the body. These small acts of rebellion are easy to overlook, but they matter. They remind us that even in the face of overwhelming power, the human spirit can endure. The story of Scaphism is not just a story of cruelty. It is also a story of survival, of the ways in which people resist dehumanization, even when all hope seems lost. The victim, trapped between the boats, becomes more than a symbol of suffering. He becomes a witness, a reminder that pain, no matter how intense, cannot erase the fundamental dignity of the individual. As the sun sets over the marsh, the air thick with the sound of insects, the condemned man's thoughts may turn to home, to family, to the life that was stolen from him. In those final moments, he is not just a victim of the state. He is a human being capable of memory, of longing, of love. The executioners may control his body, but they cannot claim his soul. In the end, Scaphism is a story about power, how it is wielded, how it is resisted, and how it shapes the lives of those caught in its grasp. It is a story that forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our world. For as long as there are those who seek to rule, there will be those who suffer. And as long as there are those who suffer, there will be stories like this, stories that demand to be remembered. No matter how much we might wish to forget, the river drifts on, indifferent to the suffering it carries. The reeds sway, the sun rises and falls, and the world continues as if nothing has changed. Yet for the condemned, time has become elastic, stretched thin by pain and fear. Each hour is an eternity, each moment a test of endurance. The body, assaulted by hunger, thirst, and infection, begins to betray itself. Hallucinations flicker at the edges of consciousness, memories of childhood, fragments of song, the faces of loved ones blurred by fever and despair. It is in these moments, when the boundary between life and death grows porous, that the true horror of Scaphism reveals itself. This is not a punishment designed for the body alone. It is an assault on the mind, a calculated effort to strip away every layer of identity, every shred of hope. The victim is not simply killed. He is unmade, reduced to a spectacle of suffering for the edification of others. But who are these others? Who watches and why? In the Persian court, the execution of a traitor was a public event, attended by officials, soldiers, and sometimes even the king himself. The condemned was paraded before the people, his fate a lesson in obedience. The message was clear: the king's justice is absolute, and no one is beyond its reach. Yet the spectacle of punishment is never just about deterrence. It is also about affirmation, about reassuring the powerful that their authority is unchallenged, that the world is as it should be. The suffering of the condemned becomes a kind of ritual, a performance that binds the community together in shared horror and relief. This is not happening to me, the onlookers think. I am safe, because I am obedient. In this way, the pain of one becomes the security of many. But the line between spectator and participant is never as clear as it seems. The same society that demands obedience also breeds resentment, fear, and the quiet hope that the king's power might one day be broken. The spectacle of Scaphism, intended to inspire terror, may also plant the seeds of rebellion. For every witness who is cowed into submission, there is another who is outraged, who sees in the victim's suffering a reflection of his own vulnerability. This tension, between power and resistance, between fear and defiance, is at the heart of the Scaphism story. It is a tension that echoes through history in every society that has used violence as a tool of control. The methods may differ, but the logic remains the same. To rule is to punish, and to punish is to remind the ruled of their place. Yet even as we trace the history of Scaphism, we must be careful not to reduce it to a simple morality tale. The people who devised and carried out this punishment were not monsters. They were human beings shaped by the values and anxieties of their time. To them, Scaphism was not an aberration, but a necessary response to the dangers that threatened the state. The king's authority was fragile, and the price of weakness was chaos. In such a world, mercy could be seen as a form of betrayal. This is perhaps the most unsettling lesson of Scaphism, that cruelty is not always the product of evil, but of fear. The same impulse that leads a parent to protect a child can, in another context, lead a ruler to inflict unimaginable suffering. The line between compassion and brutality is thinner than we like to admit. As the days pass, the condemned man's body begins to fail. The insects, drawn by the milk and honey, lay their eggs in the open wounds. Maggots hatch, feeding on the flesh. The The stench becomes unbearable, a miasma that hangs over the water. The victim, delirious with pain and fever, may beg for death, but the executioners are under orders to prolong his suffering as long as possible. More milk and honey are forced down his throat, more are smeared on his skin. The process is repeated, day after day, until the body can endure no more. Yet even in this extremity, there are moments of grace. A bird alights on the edge of the boat, its song a brief respite from the agony. A breeze stirs the reeds, carrying with it the scent of distant mountains. The condemned, in his final hours, may find solace in memory, in the knowledge that he once lived, once loved, once mattered. These moments do not erase the suffering, but they offer a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, humanity persists. The story of Scaphism is, in the end, a story about limits, about how far a society will go to protect itself, and about the limits of human endurance. It is a story that forces us to confront the reality of pain, not as an abstract concept, but as a lived experience. The victim's suffering is not just a warning to others. It is a challenge to our own sense of empathy, our own willingness to look away as the river carries the boats toward their final destination. The world outside remains largely unchanged. The court continues its intrigues, the soldiers march, the people go about their lives. The death of one man, no matter how horrific, is quickly forgotten. Yet the memory lingers, a shadow on the conscience of the empire. The story is told and retold, embellished with each telling, until it becomes a legend, a symbol of the price of power and the cost of defiance that in the centuries that follow. The details of Scaphism will fade, but its lesson will endure. The methods may change, but the impulse remains. To use suffering as a tool, to make pain into a spectacle, to remind the world of the consequences of disobedience. It is a lesson that echoes through history. In every society that has sought to rule by fear, centuries have passed since the last Scaphism boat drifted down a Persian river, but the echoes of that horror still ripple through time. The ancient world was a tapestry of punishments, each society weaving its own patterns of pain and spectacle. The Romans had crucifixion, the Chinese had lynching, the medieval Europeans devised the breaking wheel and the Iron Maiden. Yet Scaphism stands apart, not just for its cruelty, but for its intimacy. It was a punishment that required the victim to be seen, to be watched, to be remembered. The suffering was not hidden away in a dungeon or behind palace walls. It was made public, transformed into a lesson for all. Why do such stories endure? Why do we, centuries later, still shudder at the thought of Scaphism? Part of the answer lies in the power of narrative. Human beings are storytellers by nature, and the stories we tell about punishment reveal as much about us as they do about the past. Scaphism is not just a tale of cruelty. It is a meditation on the nature of justice, on the boundaries of civilization, on the darkness that lurks within us all. The ancient Persians, for all their sophistication, were not immune to fear. The empire was a marvel of administration, but it was also a house of cards, vulnerable to rebellion, invasion, and internal dissent. The king's power was absolute, but it was also precarious. In such a world, the spectacle of punishment became a kind of ritual, a way to reinforce the social order, to remind everyone of the consequences of stepping out of line. But the spectacle was not just for the masses. It was also for the king himself, a reassurance that his authority was unchallenged, that the machinery of power was still intact. The suffering of the condemned became a kind of currency, traded for the stability of the realm. The more horrific the punishment, the more secure the throne, or so it was believed. Yet history is full of ironies. The very punishments designed to preserve order often sow the seeds of chaos. The spectacle of Scaphism, intended to inspire fear, may also have inspired hatred, resentment, and the quiet hope of revenge. The king's power was absolute, but it was also brittle. The more he relied on terror, the more he risked alienating those he sought to control. This is a pattern that repeats throughout history. The tools of power, punishment, surveillance, spectacle are always double-edged. They can enforce obedience, but they can also breed resistance. The story of Scaphism is not just a story of cruelty. It is a story of the limits of power, of the ways in which violence can undermine the very order it seeks to protect. As we look back on the horrors of the past, It is tempting to congratulate ourselves on our progress. We tell ourselves that we are more civilized, more humane, more enlightened. But the truth is more complicated. The methods may have changed, but the impulse remains. We still use suffering as a tool, still make pain into a spectacle, still remind the world of the consequences of disobedience. Consider the modern world. Public executions may be rare, but the spectacle of punishment endures. We watch as lives are destroyed in courtrooms, on social media, in the relentless glare of the news cycle. The tools are different, words instead of whips, isolation instead of insects, but the logic is the same. The suffering of the few becomes a lesson for the many, a reassurance that the world is as it should be. Yet even as we inflict pain, we are haunted by the memory of those who suffered before us. The story of Scaphism lingers, a reminder that the line between civilization and barbarism is always thin, always in danger of being crossed. The ancient Persians believed that their punishments were just, that their society was ordered and rational. We believe the same about our own. But history teaches us to be wary of such certainties. The condemned man, trapped between the boats, is not just a victim of his time. He is a symbol, a warning, a challenge. His suffering forces us to confront the reality of pain, to ask ourselves what we are willing to tolerate in the name of order, of justice, of security. The story of Scaphism is a mirror, reflecting our own fears, our own capacity for cruelty. But it is also a window, offering a glimpse into the resilience of the human spirit. Even in the face of unimaginable suffering, the condemned may find ways to assert his humanity. A final word, a defiant look, a memory cherished in the darkness. These are acts of resistance, small but significant. They remind us that even in the most dire circumstances, dignity is possible. As the sun sets on the river, as the boats drift toward oblivion, the story does not end. It is retold, reimagined, passed down through generations. Each telling adds new layers, new meanings, new questions. What does it mean to be civilized? What is the price of order? How do we balance justice and mercy, power and compassion? These are questions that have no easy answers. They are the questions that define us, that shape our societies, that haunt our dreams. The story of Scaphism is not just a story of the past. It is a story for all times, a reminder that the darkness we fear is never far away. The legend of Scaphism, like all stories of extreme punishment, is more than a record of suffering. It is a lens through which we can examine the soul of a civilization. The ancient Persians, for all their achievements in governance, art, and architecture, were also architects of fear. Their empire was a marvel of human ingenuity, but it was also a crucible of anxiety, where the threat of rebellion or betrayal was ever present. In such a world, the spectacle of Scaphism was both a symptom and a cause of the empire's fragility. But what does it mean to live in a society where such punishments are possible? For the average subject of the Persian Empire, the knowledge of Scaphism was a shadow that stretched across daily life. It was a story told in whispers, a warning passed from parent to child, a reminder that the king's justice was as inexorable as the rising sun. The fear it inspired was not just fear of the king, but fear of one's neighbors, of the ever-watchful eyes of the state, of the possibility that a careless word or a moment of weakness could lead to ruin. Yet fear is a double-edged sword. It can enforce obedience, but it can also breed resentment, suspicion, and despair. The spectacle of Scaphism, intended to unify the empire through terror, may have also sown the seeds of its eventual decline. History is full of empires that relied on fear to maintain order, only to find that fear is a corrosive force, eroding trust, solidarity, and the very foundations of power. The condemned man, lying helpless between the boats, is not just a victim of the king's wrath. He is a casualty of a system that values order above all else, that sees dissent as a disease to be excised, that confuses cruelty with strength. His suffering is both a product and a reflection of the anxieties that haunt all societies, ancient and modern alike. But the story of Scaphism is not just a Persian story. It is a human story, one that finds echoes in every age and every culture. The methods may differ, but the impulse is the same. To use suffering as a tool, to make pain into a lesson, to remind the world of the consequences of defiance. The breaking wheel, the stake, the gallows, the guillotine, each is a variation on the same theme, a testament to the creativity of cruelty. And yet, for all our ingenuity in devising new forms of punishment, we are also capable of empathy, of compassion, of resistance. The story of Scaphism is not just a story of what we are capable of doing to one another. It is also a story of what we are capable of enduring, of surviving, of transcending. The condemned man, stripped of everything, may still find ways to assert his humanity, to bear witness, to remember who he was. In the end, the lesson of Scaphism is not just a warning about the dangers of unchecked power. It is a challenge to our own sense of justice, our own willingness to confront the reality of suffering. It asks us to look beyond the spectacle, to see the individual behind the punishment, to recognize the dignity that persists even in the face of unimaginable pain. That as the centuries pass, the details of Scaphism fade into legend, but the questions it raises remain urgent. What is the purpose of punishment? Is it to deter, to avenge, to rehabilitate, or simply to satisfy the demands of power? How do we balance the need for order with the imperative of mercy? What does it mean to be civilized? And how do we measure our progress? These are not questions with easy answers. They are the questions that define us, that shape our laws, our institutions, our very sense of self. The story of Scaphism is a reminder that the line between justice and cruelty is always thin, always in danger of being crossed. It is a call to vigilance, to empathy, to the recognition that every act of punishment is also an act of definition, of who we are, and who we aspire to be. In the modern world, the spectacle of punishment has taken new forms. The courtroom, the prison, the media, all are arenas in which suffering is made visible, in which the pain of the few becomes a lesson for the many. We may no longer use boats and honey, but we still use shame, isolation, and the slow grind of bureaucracy to enforce obedience. The logic is the same, even if the tools have changed. Yet even as we inflict pain, we are haunted by the memory of those who suffered before us. The story of Scaphism lingers, a shadow on the conscience of the world. It is a reminder that the darkness we fear is never far away, that the capacity for cruelty is always present, always waiting for an opportunity to emerge. But it is also a reminder of the resilience of the human spirit. The condemned man, in his final moments, may find solace in memory, in the knowledge that he once lived, once loved, once mattered. His suffering is not just a warning, it is a testament to the endurance of hope, to the possibility of redemption, to the belief that even in the darkest circumstances, dignity is possible. As the river carries the boats toward oblivion, the story does not end. It is retold, reimagined, passed down through generations. Each telling adds new layers, new meanings, new questions. The story of Scaphism is not just a story of the past. It is a story for all times, a mirror in which we see ourselves, our fears, our hopes, our capacity for both cruelty and compassion. The river is silent now, the boats long since rotted away, their cargoes forgotten by all but the most diligent chroniclers of pain. Yet the story of Scaphism endures, not because it is unique, but because it is universal. It is a story that belongs to every age, every culture, every person who has ever wondered where the boundaries of civilization truly lie. In the end, Scaphism is not just a tale of horror. It is a meditation on the nature of power, the fragility of order, and the resilience of the human soul. Imagine, for a moment, the world without such stories. Imagine a history scrubbed clean of its darkness, a past in which suffering is hidden, denied, or forgotten. What would we lose? Not just the memory of pain, but the lessons it teaches, the warnings it offers, the empathy it demands. The story of Scaphism is a challenge to our complacency, a reminder that the comforts we enjoy are often built on foundations we would rather not examine too closely. The condemned man, nameless now, is more than a victim. He is a witness, a messenger from a world that is both alien and familiar. His suffering is a question posed to all who come after. What will you do with the power you inherit? How will you treat those who are vulnerable, those who are different, those who stand in the way of your ambitions? The answer to that question is written not just in laws and institutions, but in the choices we make every day, in the ways we respond to suffering, in the ways we remember, in the ways we tell our stories. For the Persians, Scaphism was a tool, a way to enforce obedience, to maintain order, to remind the world of the king's absolute authority. But for us, it is a warning. It is a reminder that the machinery of power, once set in motion, can become a monster that devours not just its enemies, but its creators. The spectacle of punishment, intended to preserve civilization, can just as easily destroy it. Yet even in the darkest stories, there is light. The condemned man, in his final hours, may have found solace in memory, in the knowledge that he was more than his suffering. Perhaps he remembered the laughter of friends, the warmth of the sun on his face, the simple joys of a life lived before fear took hold. These memories, fragile as they are a form of resistance, a refusal to be defined solely by pain. And so the story of Scaphism becomes, in the end, a story of survival. Not survival in the sense of escaping death, but survival in the sense of enduring, of bearing witness, of refusing to let suffering have the last word. The condemned man's body may have been destroyed, but his story endures, passed down through generations. A testament to the resilience of the human spirit. We are the inheritors of that story. We are the ones who must decide what it means, how it shapes our understanding of justice, of power, of compassion. The story of Scaphism is not just a relic of the past. It is a living question, a challenge to our own sense of morality. Will we use our power to punish, to control, to dominate? Or will we use it to heal, to forgive, to build a world in which suffering is not a spectacle, but a call to action? The answer is not simple. It is not a matter of laws or policies, but of values, of empathy, of the willingness to see ourselves in the suffering of others. The story of Scaphism is a reminder that the line between civilization and barbarism is not drawn by technology or wealth or even knowledge, but by the choices we make in the face of pain. That as the sun sets on the river, as the boats drift into legend, we are left with questions that have no easy answers. What does it mean to be civilized? What is the price of order? How do we balance justice and mercy, power and compassion? These are the questions that define us, that shape our societies, that haunt our dreams. The condemned man's story is not just a warning. It is an invitation to remember, to reflect, to imagine a world in which suffering is not ignored, but confronted with honesty and courage. It is a call to empathy, to the recognition that every act of punishment is also an act of definition, of who we are, and who we aspire to be. In the end, the story of Scaphism is a mirror. It reflects our fears, our hopes, our capacity for both cruelty and kindness. It challenges us to look beyond the spectacle, to see the individual behind the punishment, to recognize the dignity that persists even in the face of unimaginable pain. As you finish this story, as you return to the world of light and comfort, remember the river, the boats, the nameless man who suffered and died so long ago. Remember that his story is not just his own, but ours as well. It is a story that demands to be told, to be heard, to be remembered, for in the end, the true horror of Scaphism is not just the suffering it inflicted, but the silence that so often follows. The silence of forgetting, of denial, of looking away. To break that silence is to honor the memory of those who suffered, to acknowledge the darkness in our own history, and to commit ourselves to a future in which such horrors are not repeated. The river flows on, indifferent and eternal. But we, the storytellers, have the power to shape its course, to remember, to learn, to change. The story of Scaphism is not just a story of the past. It is a story for all times, a reminder that the boundaries of civilization are always in flux, always in need of vigilance, always defined by the choices we make.